Yep.
Well, without further ado, we're going to begin. I'm going to kind of stay over here so I get in a film together. And my name is Bishop Ken Grin. I live in Estes Park, Colorado. And the purpose of these lectures is to explore the majesty and the breadth and depth of Teilhard de Chardin, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, born in 1881, died in France, and died in New York in 1955. So far, you can watch the videos that are on YouTube already by going to the YouTube search engine and put in Bishken, Bishken. That's short for Bishop Ken. And Bishken will get you to the YouTubes we've put up. So I'll put the one we're doing today up soon, and it'll all be part of a whole picture. What I wanted to do today, and we'll get around to some sharing a little later, but I'm going to fill in the tape here first. What I wanted to do today is I want to talk to you about the consequence of knowing something about Teilhard de Chardin to daily activity and life. And it dawned on me after a little bit of trying to put these pieces together that I could use the very words of Chardin to indicate what he saw things had to be done in order to get on with the life of understanding him. So I'm going to, from time to time, I'm going to read some of his actual material. You'll have fuller quotes of that in your packet, but I'll read some of this because I think it's very important. This is one that he wrote in 1948 while in Rome. He was trying to get the leadership to let him print a book that he had recently done. That was The Human Phenomenon, and so he was there trying to show them what he was all about, and he wrote this thing, The Basis of My Belief. First, that we have just entered historically a period of neo-humanism, which means that a person not only has a future in time, but also a future to look forward to. Secondly, in this aspect of things he was looking at, the conflict between the neo-humanist and the classic formulation of Christianity is the underlying source of a whole lot of today's religious disquiet. But he points out that the synthesis in Christ Jesus between the essential force of traditional Christianity and the propulsive force of modern neo-humanism is that our world looks to it for salvation, to that the world is looking towards that propulsive form of modern neo-humanism. So he wants to show that a Christian can be a fully human as a Marxist. Now that's made in a comment based on his day when Marxism was threatening a great deal, and a lot of people were being caught up in it, and so he's talking that to a group that was current in his day. He wants to establish on rational grounds that the neo-humanist point of view must accept the primacy of spirit if there is to be a biological justification for mankind's further progress ahead. And finally, what we have here is what he says that what he's putting together is a porch, which many of our contemporaries can stand on and provides a way into the church itself. So the neo-humanism is one thing that he's saying, and what that means for us is we need to be looking at things like that to see how then we can help people to fit in, or what you got to do to fit in to that. I'm going to take.
Does he consider himself a neo-humanist?
Yes, he would call himself a neo-humanist. I believe he would.
And how would he define that, do you think?
I'm not going to answer that right yet.
Okay.
I want to stay pretty close to my notes for a little while.
Okay.
The one thing that I really wanted to key to is, and this will be a little longer quote, but I really want to key to this, and this is the zest for living. And by a zest for life, I mean the spiritual disposition at once intellectual and affective, in virtue of which life, the world, and action seem to us luminous, interesting, appetizing. The zest for life displays the character of being essentially dynamic, constructive, and adventurous. And deep beneath it lies a hidden and hard, cold, primordial determination to survive and to superlive. And that's rock bottom will at a very deep level, and he sees that as very important. Nothing less than the energy of the universal evolution will really bring about the fullness of the zest for life. And we must do by a supremely vital operation a decision that we will work within this if we're going to have it be successful. The zest for life is driving the forces of evolution. And it is a strange prospect that all over the earth, attention of thousands of engineers and economists is concentrated on the problem of world resources of coal, oil, and uranium, and yet nobody bothers to carry out a survey of the zest for life, to take its temperature, to feed it, to look after it, and to increase it. The ultra human cannot be built except with the human, and the will to subsist and grow greater, which can equally be intensified or wither away. And what he's really saying is this zest for life is critical if we're going to see the fullness of what can be done in the evolutionary part and the part that we play within that. I want to just talk a little bit about the zest for life and then say and speak to you that is critical to the fullness of understanding of what he was talking about. And it's critical if you want to be really interested in seeing the furtherance of the kind of concepts he's talking about into the world. Now, why are all those concepts important, and what difference does it make when we begin to look at this? Well, that zest for life is a direct touch into the divine within you personally that invigorates and gives you strength, depth, and direction. Remember that the way that the history was, there was a static definition of what life was and what theology or scripture was, and it was like in a cube there. And if you studied that box enough and did enough, you'd understand it. And then there was a cube over here for science and its parts and pieces. And he says that's not enough. That's not where it's at. He says that evolution and life is in a flowing motion. It is moving. And it is moved from where it began in creation. It has continued to move where we are today, and it's going to go further until it's finished. And until you really figure out that theology, science, understanding, wisdom is in a fluid place, you're going to have a really hard time, because that's the old definition. That's the God out there and us over here. And that creates a dualism that is quite deadly to the understanding of what the universe really is, because that's not how it is. God is within. Divinity is within everything in the universe. Within everything, the Spirit is present. And when the Spirit is present, you can talk about the Trinity being present. I mean, one doesn't come... Spirit is only an aspect of divinity. So when we talk about Spirit being in everything, we're really talking about the speaker, spoken, and speaking being in everything. That's the three aspects of the Trinity that I like to use.
Say that again.
Speaker, spoken, and speaking are the three aspects of the Trinity, put in a language that is dynamic and full of life. Whereas when the Trinity was discussed in the box, it was abstract and kind of out there and removed from us. And it doesn't have that vigorous life in it. When you understand the fullness of what has happened in evolution, when you get to make peace with evolution, begin to see it is who you are, and that means you have within you the very divinity in every cell of your being, that and that in your reflective nature as human beings, you're even closer to that divinity, because now you can commune by way of conversation. You can move in relationship and communion and adoration right within nothing but yourself. You don't have to raise up any kind of extra thing or some kind of ceremony or something else. Those are useful. Those are the way we learn things. They're not to be disregarded. But sit down and get in touch with you, and you should be able to fall into adoration and communion when you fully understand what you are. So the zest for life is tapping into that marvelous reality. And when you do tap in, energy and excitement for life just pours out of you. I myself experience it a lot when I start talking and teaching, and especially when I got somebody with ears to hear. And so even though I'm frequently driving the shuttle bus to the airport and people back and forth, I got them in my chair or at least one of them, in my chair for an hour and a half. And when I get somebody who's interested in the things I'm talking about here, I just find myself being energized, super energized. And I've had that experience all my life, that when I get into the things that really matter to me in the Lord, and I get the chance to teach on them or I get to share on them, boy, the energy just begins to flow and bubble all over. And sometimes it washes those people up and puts them under about 6 feet of snow, and I have to kind of dig them out. But that's just a zest for life. And when you touch this, it changes you. Now, for instance, one of the things that Teilhard talked about so much is when he talks about the fact that the Spirit and therefore the divinity is within everything. Then you can really get excited about watching a flower or looking at a scene with the mountains and clouds, because that's full of divinity. And so if you touch it in that level, you'll feel yourself getting energized and wanting to share, wanting to commune with that. And that is what he's trying to say. The zest for life is critical to be able to go forward with the things that we really want to be doing and the things that he's encouraging that we look into. I'm going to take a moment. I want to look for one that is here's a set of quotes from him. Humankind can be seen experientially as the extreme in the direction of the arranged. Now he talks about that being part of the evolutionary process is arrangement, and we're certainly the most arranged thing that's come out of evolution, both physically, psychologically, spiritually, and so that's just a good starting point. And yet he's still treated apart in juxtaposition with, but not as an extension of, the universe of science. And that was what I read before, was that he says it's so strange that people don't understand that man is a part of this evolutionary thing and a great leap forward, but he's almost treated in science as just a biological step up and not really a lot different than the primate. And that's just not correct. Now, and therefore, you have to attach the human to a general process that covers all the experiential arrangement of the universe. And you've got to determine the possible extensions of the process in the direction of the ultra-human, and you have to discover and define the energetical conditions of this movement, which will be the quantity of energy, the arrangement of energy, and the activation of energy of the hominization of humankind. And so what he's saying is, if you understand what he's trying to say to you, he's asking you to see what you really are. And in view of what you really are, how can you sit still and not be wanting to study it deeper, enter into it more clearly with good meditation or mystic kind of experiences or sharing with people? And he says, this is important to do not only because it affects your daily living right now, but because it's going to affect you in the next dimension. And the fullness with which you gather now will be reflected in that fullness of dimension in the Omega point. So get as full as you can now. I remember a really neat little story, and I'll diverge here for a moment from Percy Calais. Percy Calais had a huge push from the Lord to see His glory. And for 7 years he prayed that prayer. And finally one day the Lord came to him, took him out of his body, and told the doctor present to leave the body alone, that it would be fine. And he was out of his body for 5.5 days and had a trip to heaven. And it's really a marvelous story of his experiences. Well, one of the things that he pointed out, he said, you really need to pay attention about what you're doing and who you are, because he said everything happens quick here in this earth. Everything is in depth. Everything moves deeply into new dimensions. He said, he used an example. He said one of the things he did is he moved through heaven. He had a lot of people taking him on little tours and stuff. And one time he and the Lord came upon the situation of the men who had condemned the woman caught in adultery. They were in heaven, but they were not rich and full of everything. So they were getting all kinds of things going on to help them to get on. The woman caught in adultery, who had made some real strides forward, was in the throne room. But they weren't. And he said, that's 2,000 years that they've been working on it. He says, you don't know what a year was there. But the point was, get on it, because it matters to you and to your future to be rich and full and to grow and to mature and to move forward. Now, once you begin to comprehend that and you look for this activation of energy to do this, then you need to know what the most important part of activation of energy is. And the key to that is simple, because it is the key to all of Teilhard de Chardin. It is love. At the center of the fact that Spirit is involved in all of creation is that love is involved in all of creation. Because the Spirit is the love of the Father and the Son together at such a maximum. It is God itself. It is God. That love is God. It is divinity. And so love is at the center. And love drives the direction. The Spirit gives direction to the way things are going. And love is driving that. Now that is really important. He says then, the more one considers the infinitely urgent problem of finding an overall plan for building up the earth, the clearer it becomes that if we are to avoid the road of brute material force, there is no way out except the road of comradeship and brotherhood. There's no way we're going to come to the unity that the very nature of evolution is calling us to, except through love. There is no other way. And so it's like he says down here, love one another. This is a gentle precept which the 2,000 years ago came like a soothing oil humbly poured on human suffering. Offers itself to our modern spirit as the most powerful and in fact the only principle of the earth's future equilibrium. And he says here, love, not justice, will save all. And no room for indolence. And lukewarm pluralisms are finished. We've got to get to this love that's full of the zest of life. We've got to get to this love that drove Yeshua to walk right into the thick of the arguments in the temple. That protected him when he was surrounded by dozens and dozens that wanted his healing, and his life character was full and rich. We need to have that kind of enduring love. And the choice that he says, the blind strong will try to possess the earth. That will be one possibility. He calls them the blind strong, because they're blind to the fullness of the zest of life, the fullness of evolution, the fullness of love. And so to that degree they're blind, but they will try to possess the earth. Or he says humans will change to become more human, and not wars of conquest, but rather struggles of conversion, or what's at hand. And it's conversion to getting to know what the mystery of love is all about. Now that may sound like a fairly simple kind of quick summary about something, but think about that, what that means in your life. What would love require of you that would take you further? What is love asking you to die to? Because always in Teilhard's thinking you have a pulse between things. And so you have a pulse between life and death. And the life that love and the zest for life takes you forward. There's a pulse then also back to death. And that's letting go and losing your ego and losing your self-importance in a way that is selfish. And so you go back and you move again towards a greater love. And Teilhard is a good example in his person of what that would require in a lot of different ways. And I say that in this manner. He was uncanny about he did not judge people. I am yet to find anything in his writings that is a strict out-and-out judgment of anything or anybody. It's just amazing to me. Well, if you understand the nature of creation when it happens, when divinity chose to create, by the very nature that divinity entered into the very smallest particles of creation and gave it the energy, force, and the drive to become all that we see today and all that we are, that meant divinity was without judgment. At the decrease, the suffering and the travail that would happen, and without fundamental judgment against the sin that would come from free individuals. And that lack of judgment that is withheld, and it belongs only to divinity, but it's withheld because divinity is always saying, well, let's see. I know a whole lot about them, and I know some places in there where they don't understand, they didn't have the right training, they got off on the right track, somebody took them down the wrong path. All those things that qualify and change the nature of sin gives room for divinity not to judge us, but rather to see us, to blow over us the conviction so that we can change and become different, so that we can go through conversion. And somewhere or another, and I've never seen it talked about in any of the books on him, I've never seen it in his own writings, someplace, Teilhard de Chardin found that quality within his person that was identified or manifested the very quality in divinity. He just didn't judge. And that is, you want to practice some fasting? Just take and give yourself a job to not judge anybody for a week. And every time you do, kind of catch yourself and say, oops, got it, and start your week over, I guess, or something. I mean, it'll really make you fast, because you'll have to quit that. And you'll have to quit that immediate knee-jerk reaction to things that will get you off in that direction. And so this business of love, that's at the basis of love, that we do not judge.
How did he handle evil?
I'll come to that next week. Evil is next week.
Okay.
So I want to stay focused here for a little bit, and then I'll take some questions. Now I want to open up a very difficult discussion, and I'll begin by looking at, not about a discussion, but at least a presentation. And then later we'll get to the discussion of it. I'm looking at two videotapes. The first one is called "What a Way to Die If You Can Handle It." And I think, let me make sure, that's kind of fuzzy there, so get my helpers on. What a way to go if at the end of the empire. If you're at the end of the empire. That's just their little title. What a way to go. And this is a discussion of all of the kind of things that humankind gets into that's really got a problem. And what they're looking at in this discussion is the huge danger that the humankind is in because of what we're doing in the environment and because of what we're doing with our world around us, and we're abusing this, we're abusing people, and it's really a depressing piece of work. And it does not ever refer to the divine within that. That's just one little insight. Meanwhile, we got another one called The Journey of the Universe. And this was done out of the teaching of Thomas Berry, and so Mary something Tucker and Brian Swim were highly behind the formation of this particular disc. And it's a 1 hour discussion that will take you through the formation of the universe to the present. I mean, it only takes an hour and you covered 13 billion years, so it's pretty interesting and it's pretty compact. But it is very good and it's very positive. It's very much different than that other one. And it's subdued in reference to the divinity, but it's there underneath the current all the time, especially because Thomas Berry was very much attached to and a part of and interested in the teachings of Teilhard, and he too would have then center in a lot of his work that of love. Now, this may not seem...
Is that in the library?
No, I had to get one is in the library and one came from another library. I had to get it on an interlibrary loan. Now this is going to raise up. I'm going to bring out a particularly sticky problem here, because it really is a problem. That if you're going to hold this position and this zest for living and really grab a hold of that, and if you're going to see that love is really at the center of things and that everything has got to come and flow out of that, you're in for some hard times, because there's a whole lot of folks out there going to take you on, and they're going to take you on by arguing you away from it. They'll try to argue away from the fact of divinity even being a part of anything. They'll try to show that science can do it all. They'll try to find ways to dodge what they don't want to face and what they're holding on to that's not too good. And then you go slam bam right smack in something like this. This is a book by Noni Darwish. Noni Darwish was born in Egypt, raised part of the time in the Gaza Strip. Her father was assassinated by the Israeli because he was such a good warrior against them in their contest with conflict with Israel. And when he was, the family, and especially Noni, was raised up to the highest level of promotion by the Prime Minister of Egypt, the ruling man in Egypt. And she had everything given to her that she needed, and she was treated like a queen practically. However, along the way she had some experiences with love, and when she got these experiences came, they were like, it was like, what was that? Kind of thing. She winds up falling in love with a Coptic Catholic. Now, this is a Coptic Christian or Catholic. It's a kind of a branch there off of some of the main lines of Catholicism. But obviously, what happened to her was the guy loved her, and so she was having these really difficult stresses. She finally got to the point where the only way she could marry him was he had to become a Muslim and they had to leave the country, namely Egypt. And so they came to America. And she, after 20 years of living within this country and absorbing our ways here and our freedoms and attitudes and so on, she wanted to take her daughters back to Egypt to meet the family, and she hadn't seen her family, her own family, she hadn't seen for a long time. She got there, and she found herself really uncomfortable because she had changed so much. And she quickly came home as soon as it was possible. She got here finally, and the next day was 9/11. And you can imagine what her standing in that middle ground between all the Muslim friends and all that thing that happened and all the accusation that goes on, all the judgment that came down, and she was trying to quiet the problems and settle things into place. It was a horrendous time. But out of that, she has grown really strong. And she now travels the world giving lectures on the nature of the Muslim law and Sharia in particular, but the Muslim in general and Sharia in particular. And so her first book was called They Now Call Me Infidel, because she left them, and actually she stands under a curse of death that they kill people that do that. And she has had enough influence to have public thing that gives her a little protection. She also wrote her second book, Cruel and Usual Punishment. And what this does is, when you are on the one hand you're trying to work out this zest for life, and you're running into love as its center and all that good, gracious things and beautiful, and then all of a sudden you run into this or something out of that, and that could be the ISIS story that you run into. It might be the problem that you see in Turkey today that's really going on, and difficulties between different ethnic groups there, or Iraq, or maybe you're looking at China or something. But in this one here, she's looking at the Sharia law, and she's pointing out in very clear detail what Sharia law is, how it functions, and what the goal is. And I guarantee you, my conclusion is, and this could get me in a whale of trouble if the wrong people see this tape, because I'm saying very clearly, I see no shred of love in the Sharia law. Now, what does that do when I sense that, when I can't see that? And I see it domination, I see it destroying the nature of the human person, I see it being tyrannical, and it's controlled by fear and violence and death and torture. And here I'm saying the other. And all of a sudden, I'm realizing I'm in a much different place. And then I have to deal with me. You see, because when I don't want to judge this situation, all those Muslims in that sense, but I know within myself that I've got a decision I've made that reaches rock solid into my deep center and goes down to that rock that is Yeshua and gives me a center pole. And it is the absolute conviction and commitment to truth. And that truth is a thing. That's Greek thinking. That's analytical thinking. That happens to be the way we think in this country most of the time. I'm talking about truth that is a person, the very Godhead. We see identified in Yeshua, we talk about it in the Trinity. That's what truth is. And so that commitment that I made decades and decades ago to truth has governed my life immensely. So what I then say when I look at this problem of really understanding Noni Darwish's teaching, her expression, her revelation, then I'm standing in contrast to that. Now, what do I do about that? You know, if you chase around and you start thinking about what you're going to do about it, and you can get into a frenzy and lose your zest for life because you get so wrought up into something. But I do know one thing, because I understand that. I know that divinity, the truth, can talk to me and tell me to do something about that, and I will be required to answer to that and go do it. And that could be life-threatening. That could be. But are you ready to take on things like that? See, that's what that zest for life, that love and that development and that getting yourself locked in place properly does to you. You become one that can be challenged. And you can be challenged at the depth of your being if divinity so asks. I don't chase that right now because I don't see divinity pushing on that. That's not where my influence is. It's not where my connections are at. But it doesn't really matter. I know that could happen. I also know that the very zest for life and the commitment to truth that comes out of that for me means that when I'm fired up and talking to somebody and I really get going on with somebody, I'm going to inevitably be like a clarion call that says to them, what are you doing about that? And how's your life going? And so my first intention at surfacing that question will be, because I want to use the tools that I've been given to help you to reach the place where you're free of all that stuff. Sometimes people get really excited about that and they say, come on, let's get together and do some work here. Fine. A lot of times what happens is, along the way of getting this truth revealed and begin to put into place, I run into something they don't want to give up. This can be a relationship that's out of line. This can be an addiction to something that's hurting their body, that's doing harm to their relationships in the family and to the country. Any number of things it might be. And if they don't want to give it up, all of a sudden they find me to be like a brick wall, and they come running and they hit the brick wall. Well, I just kind of look at them and say, well, how does that feel? You want to take another run at it, or what? Well, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to see what they're going to do. Well, after a bit, they run at me a couple of times, and they finally, that brick wall, they get tired of that. And they get tired of not getting what they want to keep around me, because I keep just kind of shadowing something different to them. I keep indicating something else. And then pretty soon, they dismiss me. In the old days, they'd burn you in the stake. But nowadays, they just excommunicate you, or they just brush you off and act as if you aren't alive anymore. And so that's the cost that comes with what I'm trying to say. This is what can happen to you when the zest for life and the truth comes alive in you. And Teilhard was well aware of that. My goodness gracious. He tried hard to get them to let him print his books. He went to Rome and contested with them about it. He wrote letters to explain to his provincial what he was really trying to say in case you didn't get it. He's really working at it. And he got nothing but no's. Nothing but absolute no's in his lifetime. And he never judged them. Boy, I tell you, that was eating a lot of bad stuff and turning it back into good, loving life.
Why do you think they said no?
And so in the process of this kind of thing, that's very important to what, if you're going to get serious about Teilhard, this is the kind of things you're going to run into, is growing up and maturing. You're going to become beautiful before the face of the Lord, and you're going to become more and more in communion with the face of the Lord, but you're also going to find yourself having to deal with people who don't understand that. And so I point that out as a problem, and then you have to figure out how to handle this and take on this stuff. Now, next week when I get into the discussion of evil and diminishment and sin, then we have to look at how you handle some of those things in more detail, and I'll try to do that in the next week or so, in the next week's session. First of all, just another. This was a reflection that he made towards the end of his life. He said, for a long time, absorbed in the delight of seeing how every single thing around me was simultaneously centered, consolidated, and amorized, I continued my attention to the coincidence of the world and God disclosed in me. He's saying he saw the magnificence of the world, but he also found it that God in the world and God in him. And so as he did that, he that delight, that process. And so he says also, when all this is said and done, I can see this. I managed to climb up the point where the universe became apparent to me as a great rising surge in which all the work that goes into serious inquiry, all the will to create, to the acceptance of suffering, converges ahead and into a single dazzling spearhead. And now at the end of my life I can stand on the peak, and I have scaled and continue to look over more closely into the future, and there evermore the assurance he sees the ascent of divinity. And so he finishes with this little thought: the vast phenomenon of classification with the coincidence of the world and God disclosed to me, and that was disclosed to me, and that caused the rise within my own self of the forces of communion. And I would also say at other times he talks about that in very rich terms of adoration also. So those two things. So you ask me what should be coming out of working and getting to know Teilhard de Chardin is a drive towards unity. A drive towards unity with divinity, and that very thing causes a drive towards unity within the context of human life, within others, and then a drive towards the material world and unity with that and harmony with that. This is what happens. And as that drive deepens and as that process continues, that puts you then deeply in touch with the very nature of communion and leads you directly to adoration and to a profundity of wordless reality of sitting before the face of divinity. That's what is pushing, and that's what is happening. Now, there's a lot of other things we're going to talk about, and all of them could be classified in this, because when we talk about the thing on evil, then that's going to be a question of what do you do with that? When we talk about activation of energy, which is really an important theme, when we talk about complexity and consciousness rising, those are all things that as you grab a hold of these, you'll get particular applications to the that which is kind of called forth in view of the walk with divinity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this little segment rest in itself. I'll let the camera go, and we'll spend some time now. I'll take some of these questions you brought up, and we'll see where it's going to go from there.